Special Town Council meeting. Clerk, please call the.
I will take roll call for Planning and Zoning Commission. Commissioner Grossi,
Here.
Commissioner Colosimo,
Here.
Commissioner Evans,
Here.
Commissioner King,
Here.
Commissioner Griffiths,
Here.
Vice Chair Hewitt. No. And Chair Erb. I think we have a quorum. So now roll call for Town Council. Councilmember Lopez.
I'm here via
Just-
phone.
Thank you. For the record, she's joining us virtually. Councilmember Keel.
Present.
Councilmember Freund.
Present.
Councilmember Greer.
Here.
Councilmember Schumacher.
Present.
Vice Mayor Searcher.
Here.
Mayor Plaguta.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll kick off the only item on the agenda. Who will be leading us? John, welcome, sir.
Thank you,
Take it
Mayor,
away.
Vice Mayor, council members, Planning and Zoning Commissioners. Really want to thank you for making time. We recognize this is off your regular schedule, and to have a turnout like this is, we're very thankful. Also like to thank community members that have been involved and made time to attend. Makes a big difference. And we have an upcoming kind of community outreach like we did on the first phase, so we're looking forward to that as well. I would like to note that the chair, Planning and Zoning Chair Erb did contact us, as well as Vice Chair Hewitt. They're both out of town for different reasons, but they're both unable. But they've been engaged, and they look forward to continue to be engaged. So just wanted to note that. I'm John Jacobson, Principal Planner and Development Services, helping lead the team on this wildlife corridor effort. And you might remember, you know, this is the second phase. So there's an awful lot that goes into this, and we're continuing on, and we couldn't be more excited. I know it's been a little while since we've been in front of you, but really see the value in sharing and letting the consultants share where we are and where we're headed. And part of that is recapping a little bit. If I could just quickly touch on a couple of things. The purpose of this session, provide a little bit of context of where we've been, and then reintroduce, you know, our highly qualified Logan Simpson consultant team, which has been very successful, not only in this endeavor, but past wildlife corridor efforts, which you might have seen case studies when we went through the first phase. So I'd like to do that. Hopefully you had a chance to look at the staff report. Like I said, I'd just like to touch, and I'll read it right out of the staff report, the purpose of the meeting tonight, this study session. The purpose of Planning and Zoning Town Council study session is to solicit input from commissioners and town council members for consideration and generation of the Town of Prescott Valley Wildlife Corridor Plan. So pretty straightforward. But in addition to that, not only did you receive attached to the staff report, but also emailed to you separately in hopes that you would have time to look at it, is that handout. And again, just to reinforce the purpose and hopefully, you know, plant the seeds, give you something to think about before you arrive tonight, just in an effort to have a little more engagement and educate you a little bit. Like I said, it's been a little bit of time since we were in front of you folks. Back in June, I think was the last time we spoke as a group. So wanted to touch on that. The context, I mentioned phase one. You might remember that was termed the foundation plan. It's on our website, and really just as by definition, it's really to do the inventory and analysis of the existing conditions and then begin to touch on some possible recommendations, but that's really what phase two is, to dig back in, take it forward, and ultimately end up with what we will call the Wildlife Corridor Plan. And you'll hear tonight some of the different pathways that we can go within the phase two. So what I'd like to do, again, the foundation plan, if we put this in context, at the very end of the document, ahead of the appendix, we have the three approaches, which now are termed pathways. So if we look back at phase one foundation plan, the first pathway, we're calling it now, align land use development standards with environmental sensitivity. And you'll see that in your handout. Again, that's our stepping off point for phase 2. Pathway 2, conserve high-value habitat areas. Pathway 3, develop a wildlife corridor and habitat overlay map. So as not to confuse, all 3 of those pathways are contained within phase 2. So what you'll hear tonight is much more detail on what those are, and then we're going to be looking for some input on prioritizing those. Yes, there are 3, they'll all be contained, but as we move forward in implementation, which of those do we feel is a priority of those 3? So that's where we're headed. Like to reintroduce, like I said, Logan Simpson, who you may have met during phase 1, highly qualified. As a little side note, I used to compete with them when I was on the consultant side. We've now kind of mended bridges, made bridges, and no, that's not the case. I mean, in our industry, we've worked collaboratively. I still know people that work over there even before we engaged in this, but I appreciate that. So their consulting firm is comprised of environmental specialists, archaeologists, community planning, and landscape architects. Sitting next to me here, Bruce Meehan, who is a nationally certified through the American Institute of Certified Planners. He's also the CEO of Logan Simpson, and I mentioned that. Bruce has been engaged in phase 1, and he really has a passion for wildlife and wildlife conservation. And if you get a minute to talk to him, make sure you carve out a couple hours once he gets going. Not that I know anything about that, but but really has been instrumental. He's not a CEO that sat in the background and just played chess. He's engaged. Christina Kircher-Webb, sitting right here. Again, she's nationally certified planner through the American Institute of Certified Planners, and she's a project manager for phase 2. Mary Gressinger has a master's in science in environmental planning, and again, she was instrumental in phase 1 and also phase 2. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Christina, and you need. Thank you.
It's gonna make a loud noise. Okay, I might have to make this closer. Okay, can you hear me? Is that going through the microphone?
A little closer, maybe.
Let's put her right up here. There we go. Okay. Thanks everyone for joining us. Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, and commissioners, thank you for joining us today. Again, my name is Christina, and I'm with Logan Simpson, and I've been, you may remember Sandy, she kind of took a step back. She still works for us, but she has been working towards retirement. She doesn't want to quite retire yet, but so I've been leading phase 2, and I have a background in wildlife corridor planning, open space corridor planning throughout the Mountain West, and most recently down in the Buckeye area as well. Mary, do you want to give any more detail?
Hello, everyone. I'm Mary Geisinger. You might remember me from phase 1 as the biological and conservation expert as part of this team. I have been with Logan Simpson for 3 years now with a base background in land use and management from local government up to federal government.
And Bruce will chime in with some thoughts and stories, and you're here to answer any questions. So today, we're going to do a brief presentation and take about maybe 10 minutes or so to do some background overview what we're hearing so far. But most of the meeting today will be interactive, and we want to hear from you. If you do have your cell phone, make sure it's on silent, but you can get it out. We're going to do a text polling type exercise where you can give feedback. So we're happy to have your verbal feedback, but also want to document and gather some other feedback. Or if you don't feel like speaking out loud, or if you have more ideas as other people are talking, we can put that into the responses as well. So that's going to be the activity discussion piece. After we go over some brief overview of phase 1 and where we've been with phase 2. So I'll let Mary.
All right. So as you guys can see, this is a two-phase project. And so phase one was really crucial for identifying the existing conditions, where the town was at, and what opportunities exist in the current environment, as well as consider every sort of example that we could bring forward to find strategies and themes that will fit with the habitat that is Prescott Valley. And so phase two is really building off of that foundation. And so kind of stacking that on top of everything that we identified and found within phase one to look ahead and innovate and aim towards implementing this plan for actions that this town can take and can put in place to then secure a wildlife connectivity in and around. So next. So with looking at phase one, we really engaged a wide variety of groups and identified key technical advisors that were really crucial with one-on-one listening sessions, 3 focus groups, and 1 major community meeting where we really just got to talk with people and listen to what the citizens' concerns are, listen to what the technical groups' concerns are, and really get to understand where everyone kind of pictures a wildlife corridor and where everyone kind of envisions the town in the future, and really carry forward these kind of ideas into identifying the crucial strategies that need to be taken to kind of combine the town back into a healthy ecosystem, looking at the 3 base habitats that really bring Prescott Valley together to what you see today. And so the main focus was on riparian waterways, grasslands, mountains, and the forest. And so these 3 habitats are crucial for the ecosystem around. And connectivity goes in between all of these habitats. You can't just look at them in one isolated form. However, they each present their own kind of strategy that can be taken to help support them. And so with these strategies that we found, we were able to kind of bring together ideas of a pathway forward. And so those lead to our 3 pathways that we're including within phase 2 and identifying the key tools as part of those strategies. So when we look at the phase 2 schedule, we've already been doing some key evaluation, key engagement, again, with our technical advisory committees that include the State Land Board. It includes large landowners in and around Prescott Valley. It includes planning organizations such as SIMPO-Y Plan, and really getting to have these engaging conversations of what works and what can work with the town. And so we've made it to where we are now in January, where we've just held some small focus groups as well, talking to citizens, mainly the wildlife groups, as well as developers and considerations for regional planning, including the Yavapai Prescott Tribe, as well as Y Plan again. And so these groups have really allowed us to be able to gain crucial feedback for establishing the directionality that will be going with these pathways for implementation. So our technical agency advisor feedback, we had very wide variety of representation from U.S. Forest Service, Arizona State Land Board, Arizona Game and Fish Department, SIMPO-Yavapai Plan, Yavapai County, PV Parks, and Public Works Departments, as well as Central Arizona Land Trust. And overall, the feedback that we've really heard is they really want clear timelines, a nice clear schedule for how we're going to implement this plan. No restrictive actions, and really focus on guiding the right kind of plans. And keeping partners involved. Partners has been the major topic that's a really key linkage between every single action that's going to occur. If we go to the next slide. So some of these agency top action topics when we were polling them on options, what tools were they most drawn to? Which tools do they want more feedback on or would like to see more flushed out ideas? And so within these 5 really, really intriguing conversations, we kind of found a focus around different programs that focus on development regulations, cluster development, revised plan development, so that we kind of had this channeled focus towards land use. However, there are within our additional pathways other considerations, such as conservation easement program, as well as considerations towards acquisition and partnerships. So our focus groups that we got to chat with today also brought in a perspective from the local citizen and the wildlife groups, as well as large landowners. And really the major highlights here was the term connectivity. You know, not focusing on a corridor with firm boundaries, but connectivity between the landscape, between the land that's available, between the land that's being utilized in different ways, that the wildlife will wander across. And so, again, that big point on partnership, everyone is excited to hear about this, including different groups, and being able to bring together the town and the council here today so that we can have these conversations continuing across different regional partners, as well as bringing in a balance of interests. You know, the wildlife groups do understand that we need housing, we need economic drive to help these projects get funded through. And so getting them to be on the same page as our regional partners and as the town is here today. And so we still understand the need for continued research. And that's something that is being highlighted to us repeatedly by Arizona Game and Fish, is things are going to change. Habits change, corridors are going to change. And so an aspect of this is helping us understand how much updates are going to need to occur throughout the years and how we're going to integrate this into general plan updates from here on out.
So that's what we've heard so far, just in, you know, really the past month or so. So now we're here to gather your feedback on the implementation piece. So what does that mean? So what you're going to get after this phase 2 is really chapter 5. So phase 2 is going to be added to the foundation guide. We might, you know, call it the plan, and document it and put it all together. So you'll get an implementation plan that includes actions that you can take and phasing. So the goal of that plan is to guide the next, you know, year or so, but also 5-10 years out, where, you know, some of these projects might be longer term, but we're going to work up to them and we're going to build off of them. So today, and in your implementation guide and in your plan, you're going to have a variety of tools, from planning tools, regulatory, funding, and policy, and also a number of projects, such as capital improvement projects. Each of these tools will be outlined in the plan. It's going to include a description. What does that mean? We'll briefly go over some of those descriptions today. Those were kind of what were in the exhibit in the packet. But we're going to add on to that. What is the level of effort? What is the staff needed? What is the funding amount needed? Basically, like orders of magnitude cost to get that completed. And what are the appropriate steps, timelines, and phasing? So do you need to do a certain tool? Do you need to take a certain planning action before you can jump into policy or capital improvements before you do other things? And then a funding approach. And then we're going to provide you with some examples. Where has this been done before? What are some key considerations for you to take as you implement that into the next steps? So a couple of definitions as we go through, like John mentioned, we're now calling this project pathways, and there's 3 project pathways, and these are just 3 sort of themes to organize the tools around, and we'll describe those here in a second. And then we have keystone projects. So within each of those, there's going to be a number of keystone projects that are identified. So today, when you're thinking about what should we be doing first, we'd love to get some of your feedback on that. So those are our keystone projects, some of the things that might need to be done first. And this is kind of an example of a graphic that can, you know, change as we get your feedback. But one example could be, you know, do your general plan update that focuses on the environmental section first, you know, that guides the future of implementation for other wildlife actions. So that could be one example. And then where are we going? What is the end goal? What is the legacy project? And so it could be a project, it could be an outcome, sort of a goal at that very top. And then in between there, you'll see all the different types of tools. And then also we have this idea of linkages. So throughout phase one, we heard the need to, well, like we were just mentioning too, partnerships and staffing and public outreach. So as we're implementing, once we finish the plan, isn't the last time you go and talk to the community and talk to the public. You're going to continue to do those types of things through all these implementation pieces. So you're going to need to have that community support, the public outreach and education. You're going to need to have staffing and as well as partners. So all of those are going to be described for each of the tools as well. Okay, now we're going to jump into the meat of it. So the 3 project pathways. So these are summarized in sort of a high level at the end of the foundation guide. And we've taken a little bit more time over the past month or two to refine based on that agency guidance, based on staff, based on what we've know of the community to boil those down into a number of tools. So this is the quick overview, and then I'll introduce the activity, and then we'll go into more detail of each of the tools. So the first one is align land use and development standards with environmental sensitivity. So building off of the guidance that we've gotten in the guide from what are important connectivity corridors, what's important wildlife connections that we've heard from Arizona Game and Fish, how can we pull that into guidance for future development to develop in environmentally sensitive ways in certain areas. Second is to actually conserve high-value habitat as well as connectivity areas. And we can do that through a number of measures, whether that's working with willing landowners, whether that's including conservation easements or maybe even direct acquisition. And then finally, and these are no real order, and they can kind of ebb and flow and happen in tandem and happen in together. But the third one is to develop an actual wildlife corridor map and then a potential overlay map that would be integrated with your land use code. Okay, this is where we're gonna go into the activity. So again, we want to put into the plan what's implementable, what's actionable, so you have a clear path. The planning staff, the parks department, and your partners have a clear path of what should happen first, what needs to happen next, and how we can actually get that implemented. So we need your input. We need your input on helping to guide the implementation plan. So we're gonna tell you and inform you of all the different types of tools, from planning elements to regulatory elements to projects that we can use to implement the vision and the goals of the wildlife corridor. And so we want to provide in the document the necessary level of detail. So that's why we need your feedback today. So we're gonna rank, we're not going to rank projects. Sorry, we're just going to get your input on these and get ask you for clarifying, ask you to give us clarifying questions so we can make sure that we have in the plan the necessary information that you need. Okay, so before we jump into the first description, if you and commissioners and council members, please, and I think we have one council member online. So this will be ask for their feedback. And we will be going out to the general public and getting their feedback here in the coming months. So we're going to ask you to refrain from participating, but this will be for the joint work session here today.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Hi, Bree King, Planning and Zoning Commission. I just want to make sure I'm understanding the assignment correctly. So if we are looking into the intro to the 3 project pathways, which we have defined as 1, 2, and 3, what you're saying is these aren't mutually exclusive. They kind of blend together. And so then when we're probably going to be doing our answers based upon these questions that we're being asked, we might be asked to rank them, but just maybe in order of sensitivity or?
So yeah, at the very end, we're kind of just going to look at the 3 overall pathways together and look at prioritization of the 3 pathways. So kind of which one is more kind of the first goal for you as well.
Okay, so these are overall pathways that we're trying to get to. We're trying to see which pathway here is of the highest value that we could bring, but they intertwine in between.
They do.
Got it. Okay, thank you so much.
Miss Christina, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Thank you, Sandy Griffiths. On the 3 project pathways, number 2, you've used the terminology high-value habitat areas. Number 3, you've used the terminology, just the word habitat overlay. So is there a difference with high-value habitat areas? I thought it was all high-value habitat versus habitat.
Yeah, that's a great question, and something that I would love to hear your feedback on. What kind of criteria should we put into these tools? I don't think that's quite, we'll go through some of those details eventually. But yeah, you're right. Words matter. Do you have anything to add to that, Mary?
Yeah, so, that second project pathway is more focused on targeted land acquisition, targeted land actions. And so that's with a focus more on high-value habitat versus project pathway number 3 focuses on all land, all uses, because we know that pronghorn as a key species as part of this plan, they don't see the lines and the boundaries that we see. They don't see the land use and the differences of lands that we consider for and what value we place on them versus what value that they have. And so that one looks a lot more towards the connectivity versus just the quality of the habitat and the protection of it.
Okay. Crash course in planning 101. This is a master's level course in planning here. But so out of the case studies that we reviewed, so really looking at in the foundation guide, we asked communities around Arizona, around best practices across the nation as well. What's working? What are some of the guidance and direction that you took to get to where you are to preserve wildlife corridors, conservation areas, protect open space, those types of things. So these are some of the tools that came out of the case studies and what we're
Kimberly
hearing from
Lopez
the community as well.
Is now exiting.
Okay, so the first one would be looking at the general plan update. So this could be probably just that we're looking at a minor amendment really to look at your environmental section and align that with your with some of the goals and policy and vision that's coming out of this document. And so I know that's a relatively recently approved a document, and so we're not going to crack the whole thing open, but we could look at a minor amendment. There are other circumstances where maybe you would look at a major amendment if you're looking at your land use plan. So the general plan is setting your policy guidance to guide some of these other elements. So that is one that we would recommend to kind of look at initially that would help inform other tools. The second one is revised plan development agreements. So a lot of the land are, they have some sort of already entitlement or maybe a development pattern that's already happening. And so one is to look at rezoning that makes that actually incentivize having straight zoning more of an incentive than having their planned agreement. So this is one thing we could look at, and this would be coupled with some other tools where you're looking at different incentives to help look at mitigation of certain areas that are tied to that wildlife overlay. The third is looking at zoning and development regulation updates. And so this is looking at different standards to be more wildlife friendly. These could happen townwide or they could happen in that wildlife corridor overlay area. So again, that's where these things start to overlap a little bit. And so you could look at incentivizing and providing some of these development regulation updates as, a way to get other benefits as well. So we could look at, native landscaping, wildlife-friendly site design, such as like fencing, planting, waterwise strategies, and dark skies standards as well. The next one is around your riparian areas and floodplain buffers. And so again, this would look at some of your development regulations to provide buffers around your different waterways. And so these may vary depending on the size and the volume and the importance of that wash to not only protect your megafauna, but also some of your amphibians as well. and looking at different areas. And then this also provides that multi-use benefit. So, flood control, if you protect some of these waterways in riparian areas, you could, have some passive recreation like a trail. So a lot of good waterway corridors are good trail corridors. So you could have some of those other benefits with not only this concept, but some of the other ideas as well. And then cluster development. This is a specific subdivision design or conservation development. Sometimes it's called, is where you get a benefit from clustering some of your areas. And we'll talk about some other land use patterns as well. And one of the things that we would want to do is align this with a corridor overlay so that folks are clustering, and actually I might move on to this graphic. So you're kind of clustering all to one side. So if you have whatever your corridor is, then if you have that corridor in place and then you ask folks to cluster or do some sort of transfer of development rights or set aside open space, that everyone's kind of doing it in that same vision. And so you're not having like someone's open space over here and then someone at open space over here, which creates smaller islands. But if they put them in the same sort of general area, you're kind of creating a broader benefit to wildlife movement, to trail corridor planning, to flood control, to other benefits with visual identity of looking at preserved open space as well. So really, this is the question that we'll have for each of the pathways. It's just trying to get some information from you. If you have any questions or thoughts about this pathway, what are some things that excites you about this pathway? If you want to throw your feedback up there, or happy to hear your input as well. But this is the question that we'll be asking for each of the pathways, and then we'll have a final question to kind of prioritize and rank the three pathways amongst each other. So, yeah. Feel free to put something in there if you have any ideas, have any questions. What are we missing? What do we need to make sure we have in the plan that's that will make this clear for you, so that, and you can flip open your packet so you can read those five things again. So yeah, anything around the general plan, development agreements, regulatory development standards. What are the questions? Any questions or thoughts? You can just add one bubble, but you can put as many thoughts in there. Or if you hit submit and then you think of another idea, feel free to send it. But does anyone want to? Everyone's thinking really hard. Or if you don't feel like typing, you can just, sometimes it's easier to type, sometimes it's harder to type.
And just something for this really, maybe it's too close to that. We'll end up with all of these strategies. So it's, what we're trying to find is what's the right pathway for us to really begin this whole thing. And this is a long journey ahead. Some of these are heavy lifts. They involve lots of different outside agencies, entities. Private landowners have to be at the table. That takes a long time to negotiate those things. There's a lot of regulatory components. So as we look at updating the zoning codes and stuff. So so I just want to make sure everyone knows that we'll end up eventually over time with all of these tools, but we want to find what is the best pathway going forward to begin to implement.
Should scroll if we get another. There we go. Yeah, a lot of great questions. So these are, very good questions for us to clarify in the plan. Can cattle access? Yeah, we were talking with a large landowner, ranch owner that, wildlife habitat happens to be a byproduct of their land, So working with those as well. I'll see it always. Sorry, I didn't mean to scroll.
And I think a crucial part of some of these questions is really that integration of all three of these project pathways. So we're going to see more and more of the answers to these questions coming up with some of the actions and tools that will happen with the other project pathways, especially project pathway number 3. And so it's really important to know that the focus isn't about restricting land use, but working together with land use on these sort of actions.
I might have missed this in phase 1, but, and my middle name is kind of skeptical, but unfortunately, early this afternoon, I read a critique of an Inconvenient Truth 20 years later. So it makes me worry about new kind of concepts that wind up being damaging over time. Like, does a wildlife corridor for the predators become a corridor to the mess hall, for example, as an unintended consequence? How long has this science been around, and how many examples do we have of things that worked, or more importantly, things that didn't work, so we don't repeat those? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. From like a biology, like from a wildlife, like,
Not for, I'm
Or
less
from a
worried
land
about
use
the
side?
regulations and more worried
Yeah.
about the animals.
oh,
And in meddling in there, and they're very adaptable creatures. This afternoon, I'm heading, sort of down the hill towards Antelope Hills, and by the Granite Dells exit, there's, 30 pronghorn laying down, very happy, 150 yards from the highway. If we try to manage, overmanage that sort of thing, that's my basic concern, and messing up the animals who are naturally very adaptable.
yeah, I'll answer from a land use side before we talk about.
Yeah, from the wildlife side, there is no managing how and where they want to go. It is about finding a way that we're preserving the area that they are using and that they are preferring. And so that's why this continued research is always going to be needed as any part of this implementation plan, because things will change, habits will change. And we've seen that across many, many, many projects throughout the years. And, even looking back in history to how the Native Americans tracked these herds, tracked the ancient bison species that used to be across the landscape here. And so they changed their movement patterns. So it's how can we bring in that flexibility into the plan without giving a hard, firm boundary that isn't flexible with the different uses of the landscape, so that we can adapt as we go into the future without restricting ourselves into one area. It's a focus on the aspects of the habitat that they need. When we're talking with the large landowner, they are drawn to the water sources that he has for his cattle. That's a crucial aspect when the agua fria dries up during the dry months, and with all the other drainages when they don't have any water flowing in them. It's crucial for pronghorn to take advantage of the ranching infrastructure that we have throughout the valley. And so that can be a really crucial thing, where we don't want to limit those land uses that do still support the wildlife, and they can work together with the wildlife. And so that's a big aspect of this project pathway number 1, is bringing together those land uses, and so that we can support that already joint use that we're having.
And I would also add that, we've been planning for a while, and we do need to look at adaptive management of wildlife and planning. And so, but we've seen, riparian buffers, for example, benefit and protection communities from floodplains. We've seen communities that were built adjacent to, forested areas burned down. So like looking at different communities where there's there's good planning that has identified where certain infrastructure has gone to, not create traffic problems too. So if you're kind of planning with all of these aspects in mind, you're having an more efficient community as far as, more roads to plow and more infrastructure to manage, those types of things as well. So we're looking at, efficient planning communities as well. So, yeah. All right, I can't figure out how we can.
Can I ask a question, please? Bree King, Planning and Zoning. So I'd like to maybe ask one of the hard questions related to cluster development. And this is more somewhat, I'm very, very much an environmentalist myself and all for conserving the animals, but I have a question maybe more so towards the citizens of the town and this cluster development piece that we're looking at for number 5. And so from being the experts, which I'm not in this, so that's why we have you, right? From other clients that you've represented and from the knowledge and background that you guys have acquired, what are the best practices that you have been able to bring to the table and suggestions as consultants as to how do we facilitate such cluster development? And I recognize here it's maybe a GP update, right? And a revised plan, and that takes a lot of time and energy and consensus. So what are the best practices and maybe the road of least resistance that we can use for such? And then also, what happens to those constituents who might be on the side of a corridor where it's not clustered? And so if we want to maybe make that a piece of the area, what happens to those? What happens to that property? Where do we go from there? I know that might have been
Existing
two-pronged.
builds?
Yeah. So
Yeah,
it's kind of a two-pronged
I think I've
question
heard
of
this before.
what's the road of least resistance to update, like maybe a GP or something of that sort, meaning the general plan, and then what happens to the existing builds from there?
Yeah. We can't, can't right the wrongs of the past. And so unfortunately, yeah, there are certain things we can look at for, educating community members on, on landscaping species and fencing, on existing built development. So we're going to be primarily thinking about future development here. And some of the best practices and, that we've seen in cluster development is around the providing incentives, right? And so some of those pieces are important to this as well. We're also seeing different land use patterns, different changes in folks wanting to downsize as they retire, and so some smaller homes or more affordable homes and things like that too. So some of those things that are changing housing patterns as well are probably in our favor as well. I don't know, Bruce, do you have any other thoughts on that? Yeah. He's more of our housing.
Yeah, no, just on cluster development, how it would work, maybe, if I answer it that way. So essentially, if you're talking about, I like where you were going because it's a really easy tool to get done quickly. In addition to, the general plan amendment might be another way to do it in terms of an overlay. But just imagine that you have an overlay where the wildlife is generally going, and it's a little bit amorphous, but it's generally here, so it gives you some flexibility. You provide private property owners an opportunity to opt into a cluster development. Why would I ever opt into a cluster development, meaning restrict some of my land and leave it open space and then develop the rest, is because usually that's associated with a multiplier. So if you think about, hey, I can get, say it's a large piece of land, 100 units, or well, let's bring it down, maybe 10 units on this property. Okay, I can cluster those and I can have 10 over here in smaller development, the rest is open space. But usually it's associated with a multiplier. So if I cluster, your multiplier might be 2. So I'm allowed to do 20 units instead of 10. Or I'm allowed to do, my property's bigger, maybe the incentive's bigger, and I'm allowed to do 30 on that unit. Maybe if it's bigger and I own a huge piece that I put together, I'm allowed to do a 6 multiplier or something, and I'm allowed to do 60 units and save the rest. So that would be something where that developer could choose maybe wildlife-friendly design, keep the current entitlements, or choose option B, which is incentive-based, and go get more units, but get more open space adjacent to that. As far as, properties that are adjacent to this area, are people allowed to, this is more a John question, does the code allow people to exercise that zoning even if they're not in the overlay zone? Maybe they're on the edge, but they still want to use that zoning classification. There may be a family that says, I love how beautiful it is here. I want my farm and my area to look the same, but I want to make sure that I get a good return on my property. So I want to execute your new zoning classification or your new incentive, which is this cluster development, even though I'm not part of the overlay zone, but I'm close enough. So that's something that we would have to work out in your code. But I don't know if that's what you're getting at, but that's an easy, very practical, I wouldn't say, I said I wouldn't say easy more in planning. There's nothing easy, but it's a very, very obtainable, successful tool, not a lot of drawbacks. The one thing I would say is you also asked about lessons learned. You'll see these sort of books where you see these little pods of 6 houses, 6 houses, 6 houses. It's not the greatest pattern. You're looking for more what you saw in that picture where you see that larger quarter. I'll add one other component to that, just add some more fuel to the fire. It's possible that even your open space is transferable. So where you were going to preserve your open space on your property, you're allowed to actually preserve it somewhere else, meaning somewhere else in that wildlife corridor. So I'm going to do it over here. I'm going to develop all my property, but I'm going to develop a lot of my property, but I'm going to also do my preservation somewhere else in a different part of the corridor. So I hope that helps, that detail. So
Very helpful. I'm enlightened. Thank you.
Wanted to look at this as what kind of tools does this program have for those that may be more development focused, more concerned with the town's growth, economic boom? How do we educate those people who have that focus at the forefront?
Yeah, definitely. I think we're not trying to provide one complete direction on either side. We're definitely looking at that balance and that flexibility for the town to listen to like the willing landowners to come to the table. And so part of that, and we'll talk about conservation easements here in a minute, working with willing landowners to do that, where you pay for that development, or that right to not develop, I should say. And so there are some tools in there that will be really important to work with the partners like the Nature Conservancy and folks that are on the ground, the Cattlemen or the Central Arizona Land Trust Alliance, people that want to be on the ground and talk to and kind of establish those relationships. And it's really about those relationships with specific landowners and making that that education push to them. Got some groupings of some conversations. So we'll continue to put in some more information about wildlife management, water protection, corridor standards, and other elements as we go forward. Oh man, sorry, I'm having issues with the different screens here. Okay, so we will continue to refine and address those considerations as we look to put your implementation plan. So we'll move into project pathway number 2. So conserving habitat and that high value habitat and that connectivity. There's a number of ways to look at doing this. So some of these are also land use kind of concepts as well. So density bonuses, and so density bonuses is where you get, that incentives or that trade-off for the mitigation of protection of open space within a wildlife corridor. So if we have that sort of amorphous wildlife overlay, then you can opt into density bonuses. That's another kind of similar to cluster development. Conservation easements, and so working with partners to hold conservation easements. I believe Yavapai County is currently working towards becoming a certified land, or they are thinking about being in the conservation easement realm, but other conservation easement holders such as Land Trust could come in and work with willing landowners. And part of that, there are funds, there's transaction cost, there's the fee to take that percentage of that development. So there is some funding that could be help to move that forward. Direct acquisition, if you want to be in the realm of managing open spaces. And we could look at some of that fund is one option. A lot of communities who want to have an open space, department and manage lands. Or you could look at different partners like that would want to do that type of activity. Transfer of development rights. And so this is where you have sending and receiving areas. So you would similarly want to develop a mapping element and to what areas would be your sending areas. And so this is the sending areas are taking those development rights and sending them away. And then you identify different receiving areas. And so this is conversation to identify where those receiving areas would be. So where do we want to have higher density? And then there's a fiscal analysis, a financial model to make everyone kind of whole throughout that process. And so we would need to complete a study to see if that's feasible, if that's desirable, and what areas would be amenable to that type of program. And then finally, working a restoration plan. This could be working with existing open space lands, existing landowners, as well as any lands that are newly conserved, to conserve those lands for those wildlife habitat values. This could be informing people of how to conserve or how to restore the land, what are best grazing practices, what are best management practices of that land. And then finding research and grants and funding to, work on, a riparian corridor that might be incised or something like that as well to be more amenable to soil health and to waterway health as well. So those are different ways we can conserve that high value habitat. This is just kind of a similar, different diagram of how you could do that. Like I mentioned, for transfer development rights, you would identify some of those sending areas and those receiving areas as well. So that's kind of just a quick overview. Okay, on to the same question about pathway 2. So we're talking about density bonus, conservation easements, direct acquisition. What are some of their thoughts on this? What are the questions? Any of these really excite you? What's missing? What do we need to, we're trying to give you a quick overview, but we want to make sure that in the plan that we provide answer any questions that you have about this. So when it comes to who implements this tool, what are the partners, any questions we can clarify when we're putting together the implementation plan.
Hi, Janelle Keel with the Prescott Valley Town Council. When we're talking about conservation, putting it in a conservancy like the Nature Conservancy, would the wildlife corridor, would those rights be transferred into something like that, or would it be transferred to the town? Those are the two options, right?
Yeah, so the land still stays with the landowner. So whoever, if a conservation easement is an agreement by a landowner to give up their rights to develop and build on that land. Often they get a building envelope for an extra house or a building where they can do that, and then they have to have certain prescriptions of this is how we're managing the land, this is the restoration that we're going to do on this land, but it still stays within the ownership and the management of that landowner. The conservation easement and the rights of that and that monitoring is held by a land trust or a certified conservation easement holder. And so like the Nature Conservancy, a county can be a conservation easement holder, a city can even be a conservation easement holder, but all that means is that they are going to come in and monitor, make sure that you're not building outside of that development envelope that you said, and they're going to work with that landowner to protect that land and manage for the resources that are on the land. So that's what it means to be a conservation easement holder. It's, it's some staffing and some time to do that. You have to monitor conservation easement every year, but it's not like the conservation easement holder is managing that land. The landowner is managing that land. Yeah, and kind of
Two
on that-
answers in there that sort of sounded the same. I was having problems with the app, so forgive the repetition.
You're having apps. Oh, sorry about that. Are you able to get back on? Okay.
And can the town transfer land to, say, the Nature Conservancy, do a conservancy easement if some of the town-owned land is in a wildlife corridor?
Yeah, so the town can still own the land and manage the land and have the development rights held by the conservation easement holder. So,
That would be protected.
yeah, yeah. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, so previously I'd done some work in New Hampshire with the Society for Protection of New Hampshire Forests, which is one of the oldest conservation land trust organizations in the United States. And so they've been around for over 100 years. And one of their key aspects of their conservation easement program is jointly working with towns, municipalities to have a joint working and conservation focus and plan for each property that they get so that they can jointly manage with the landowners to achieve whichever goal is identified to be key for the property, whether it be restoration, whether it be forestry management, which was a key aspect in that state, or whether it be creating a new open space for the public to be able to come to and enjoy the property.
Thank you.
So yeah, kind of to answer that other question, the easement acquisition is done by the conservation easement holder, so like the Nature Conservancy or land trust.
I have a question also. Kendall Schumacher, Town Council. On part of this, it looks like that this has trails and parks master plan, and I know we're planning on doing the Lasso Loop, which will be a lot of traffic on it, let's say, for horses, bicyclists, pedestrians, whatever. If it looks like part of this actually goes into where there's like trails and parks, looks like it has also part of where the conservatory is. So how close are people going to be able to get to this area to photograph, even for a lot of people who like to photograph wildlife? I know there's more than just the pronghorn, but I know when I drive 89A, especially in the morning or late afternoon, I see all the pronghorn there anyway. But I know it's for all other wildlife as well. And I was just wondering if having the citizens or the people there, is that going to interfere with the natural habitat of what the animals are going to adapt to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a couple pieces of that. One, it would depend on the actual land that is conserved and that landowner. Another piece is that sort of the definition of open space, and looking at through your general plan update to identify more preserve versus passive recreation types of activities that we would want and that could be in tandem with wildlife movement. We see that in other other jurisdictions, that there are trails and there's certain densities of trails that you could recommend versus other types of parks and open spaces that are more active develop. And so I think that's one of the things you could do in your general plan and your regulations, is defining what that means. And so when that area is up for that conservation, that you're like, okay, this is the type of open space that we want it to be, and these are the activities that we think are consistent with wildlife movement. Wildlife can cohabitate with trails if there's like a large enough buffer, if they feel like they're, have that sight distance as well. Does that answer?
Yes, thank you.
Anything else on pathway 2? Okay, so our third pathway is around developing a wildlife corridor and habitat overlay map. So I'll pass this over to me.
Awesome. So this pathway really has much more directionality. So there's an order of action that would need to occur for each of these steps to fall into place and to work together. And so starting with that is the wildlife corridor overlay. So this is the map that would provide the soft boundary of targeted area that would aim for where we want to support agriculture, support acquisition of conservation easements, support the acquisition of parks and open space, support how we'd want cluster development and these planned developments to take action, as well as then in the future, guide trails plans, guide transportation plans, so that we can have these ideas and these locations that we want to prioritize these development regulations. Following that is research. Research is huge. The climate and environment is ever changing around here, as well as the habitat and the movement of all the species in this area. And so this is something that Arizona Game and Fish, as well as regional groups, really want to work together on, and must just keep being integrated in with this overlay map. So ideally, this wildlife corridor overlay map continues with each general plan update and will be updated regularly with the research that is done. Then we have wildlife crossing designation. So following the research and integrating with this corridor overlay map is identifying those key locations of wildlife crossings and aiming those towards capital improvement projects. So whether it is updating of signage for certain locations, updating fencing, updating considerations for transportation, and then leading into our fourth action of fencing, transportation, and wildlife crossing plans and standards. So creating that sort of standard around with the usage of transportation, with the usage of trails, with the usage of development, so that the fencing, transportation, and wildlife crossings can come together to really support the human-wildlife conflict and reduce that human-wildlife conflict to then support the movement of the habitat and the wildlife and connect each of these landscapes. And so that we can still have all of the areas, all of the uses, but can connect across the different barriers that we have throughout the town. And then finally, that fifth, that legacy project would be a wildlife overpass. And so as research has been done and with the support of state agencies, federal agencies, we can aim towards a large capital improvement project with the state and federal funding to create that beautiful wildlife overpass that then connects the landscapes, which I know is the dream. It's the dream. And so that's kind of this project pathway. It's got its sort of steps and directionality that needs to come together to then get to that end legacy vision.
One of the, I attended a Game and Fish presentation about the wildlife migration in the area. And one of the big problems they stated, was it, John, was it Mr. Gagnon? Was that? Jeff Gagnon, yeah. He indicated that one of the things holding us back from having good data is that there's not enough, there aren't enough collars, GPS collars for the pronghorn. And that seems like a fairly minor barrier that we should be able to it's one thing to build a highway overpass. It's another thing to, buy some collars. What can we do to make that happen?
Yeah, so that's a really great starting point for talking about like the partnerships and looking towards grants that can then support the town to help support research around whether it is be collaborating with Arizona Game and Fish so that you guys can bring on a consultant biologist that will help conduct the studies for you so that we can find these key crossing points that we want to aim these development regulations towards, or working with one of the land trust or nature conservancy groups around so that they can help support their research that they're going to be doing and that can be integrated within our future plans.
Caden Grass, Planning and Zoning. I have two questions. One, you touched on the funding. Could you elaborate a little more on the overall funding for this project? You mentioned the state and federal grants. What other options are there? What is on the funding tool belt?
Yeah. Yeah, and feel free to, as I'm talking, to add some more comments on funding into this Menti here as well. But we will be providing some funding recommendations for basically a toolkit in the plan as well. So there will be a need for some sort of dedicated funding. Your privilege use sales tax or property tax at the county level could be an option. We see that across many communities to dedicate a portion of those fundings to projects. Those are very well documented as things that could be used for in perpetuity. It's not easy to get grants, and you need staff to write grants, and you often need matching funds for those grants. And so having some sort of dedicated funding source is going to be most likely needed. I'll love to hear some feedback on that as well. But we will have a number of other funding sources. There's partnerships at the county level, at the SIMPO, there's federal grants. Sort of the federal climate keeps changing as well. And so we saw a lot of programs through COVID recovery, IRA funding, but those big funding bill packages change a lot, and your state transportation funding as well. There could be priorities in your state funding transportation. But again, those are all things that require effort to go after. So I will say that there's going to have to be a mix of partnerships, grants, and maybe a dedicated source.
Thank you. My second question it refers back to the Project Pathway 1. I know the term acquisition, easements, people get really scared, think you're taking their land, they can't do anything on it. Can you explain it to us as we're children almost?
An easement? A conservation easement?
Yes.
Yeah. So conservation easement is where a willing landowner takes their, based on how your zoning is, you are dedicated to and entitled to a certain amount of level of development. And so that's worth something, that's worth monetary cost. And so conservation easement is a willing landowner gives up that right for that development. And so they get paid for that, that removal of that development right. There's also some states have incentives to monetize that and give you your benefits for that as well, and reduce your tax liability also. So you're reducing your tax liability, and so there's sort of multiple layers of benefits that way as well. So.
See that a lot with ranchers. So if you have a ranching family and let's say, they're probably not going to have the kids wanting to continue, that's a great way to preserve all of that, but they're able to still have the ranching operation, the lifestyle, but they're not having to carry the cost of that property.
That's why I ask, so those that aren't aware can reduce the fear. Yeah, it's a common thing of like, you're taking my land. No, we're protecting it into perpetuity.
Yeah, and it's all done with willing.
on this same question, what has it looked like? There are other towns that have adopted this process, and what are we getting ourselves into? I have a feeling that not everyone is going to agree 100% on implementing this. So what in typical communities, what kind of responses were there? What did it look like?
I'll kick off with talking about one of the case studies that we looked at in the first phase. And so that was looking at the town of Marana here in Arizona and all the work that they've done. And so over the last 20 years, they've been implementing through research studies, through their town general plan, and working together with the county as well as the Sonoran Desert Conservation to implement their wildlife corridor and movement through their town. And, what they've really seen is really positive development, really positive planned communities coming in and working with this. And they have a whole game camera system up on some of their wildlife underpasses and overpasses, tracking the animals that are using them. And they've seen really good success with the research that they've done with Arizona Game and Fish through correctly identifying these right passages, placing them in crucial areas, and then animals using them. And so that we have this direct connectivity across the town between the two conservation areas that surrounds them, kind of in a similar situation where we are with the Forest Service surrounding us. And so we see the success they have there, even though they are a slightly larger town. They were able to work through that over the last 2 decades to now a very functionable actions that are integrated in every level, from their transportation plans to their town general plans to now a really successful natural areas.
I'll just add, I was there during many of those years. What we saw happen, and there were many debates and private property owners that were concerned, developers who felt like this was, undue regulation and whatnot. I think once a lot of some of these planning efforts were all, put into place, developers began to realize they could make more money. They could have better outcomes, still build. And I think it started to create where there weren't any surprises. So in our environment, we have surprises all the time, right? So a developer comes in and they want to go through a process, and then it turns into a whole community debate. If you know up front, this area that has been mapped out, we know where some of these corridors are, this is a highly sensitive area. And if you're going to be in that area, here's the things you're going to have to do. So it's all kind of laid out where we still can accommodate our future of our community and have growth and welcome growth in areas. But we're also really put in place the protection for open space and those connectivity. And you eliminated so many surprises of people going through a whole process and then it having, people being upset about it. So it was a really good way to kind of level set all the way through. And developers began to realize, wow, we can market homes built in this particular area that you're next to a permanent wildlife corridor preserve, whatever you call it. And, the value goes up astronomically, and the quality of life for those residents, they know that's going to be permanent open space. And so everyone kind of benefits with that.
Right. Very, very well said, Gilbert. I think I was going to add on to that, the benefits, the predictability with also having that flexibility where you can opt into some of these things, but it creates that multiple benefits where, you're next to wildlife corridor. And so you can sell more properties at maybe a higher value. You're attracting, high quality residents that want to be a part of this community. And we still have some challenges. We still have to talk through, some of the criteria for the wildlife corridor. So I think we still have conversations to have. So that might be, some of the the considerations, but
Just in one other thing, the difference, we don't have a protected species here, which is a good thing. Pima County, where Tucson, Marana, Oro Valley, they had several endangered species. So they had a pig, it's called the pygmy owl, it's a cute little owl. When that got put on the endangered species list, you know, that triggered federal, literally it shut down development in broad, huge areas of the community. And so, you know, we don't have that. And I think that we have an opportunity to really kind of look at, it. You know, obviously pronghorn is near and dear to everyone, but there's other species too that we want to think about in terms of how do you get from one mountain range to other mountain ranges for that, you know, being able to cross over for breeding purposes and prey and whatnot. So, so I think we are in a good position where we're not up against the federal government saying, you now have this and now all of your plans are put on hold until you get this figured out. So I think we're doing some really bold, innovative things, I think, as a community, and are going to help to lead the way for the rest of the region with this type of thinking.
any other questions? And so, yeah, feel free to ask us any other questions. We do want to get your feedback on 2 more questions. This one is about which project pathway would you prioritize? And I know some people put in some feedback on that last slide of rearranging some things, and we can look at doing that. So happy to hear any feedback on prioritization, as well as if you have any ideas on, you know, if there's one key project or thing that you want to see happen, throw that in there.
Yeah, I think the wildlife mapping is critical. And I was curious, are you working with Prescott or Yavapai County at all? Okay, because there are areas that connect that there are some areas that are at risk very soon.
Yeah, we'll definitely be, and some of the initial mapping that we have in the foundation guide shows that bigger framework of the wildlife movement and conservation and, you know, corridors that come through the headwaters of, you know, the Agua Fria, for example, that come through the town. Will want to connect with broader conservation. That also makes it more appeasable to folks that want to hold the conservation easements, for example. They don't want to see as much, like they don't want to see the patchwork, right? They want to see a bigger vision. So working with the county and having some of these conversations at the broader level, I think are very important. So all of this will have to have some regional coordination for sure.
And they seem ready to do this. So conversations I've had.
Oh. Any other thoughts?
The other breaking planning and zoning, the other piece that I really like about Pathway Project 3 with this wildlife corridor overlay is that it, in a way, requires the collaboration that we need with the state and these other big players that are going to be involved. And so getting that relationship, maintaining that relationship, keeping them involved in such a relationship, then it really builds that rapport that will then have that trickle-down effect to everything else that comes there too.
Got one final question. You had to summarize your vision for the next 20 years with wildlife in Prescott Valley. What would that be? So what do you want us to take home that we want to make sure is in this implementation plan? You know, what's your main goal? Just kind of big picture. If you were writing your postcard to yourself in 20 years, would it be that one big project? Should we put all of our coins in one big project? Should we focus on some smaller projects? Another way to think about it.
A whole picture.
A big picture?
Yeah.
Can you draw us a picture? Yeah.
Yeah, later.
Waiting to see what other people say first. What is there? Any other final questions or thoughts as we, work with the town staff, the technical advisors, state land, ADOT, Game and Fish? We really want to make sure that they're part of this implementation plan, getting those regional partners on board as well. So, any other thoughts as we start to draft the plan for your review? The implementation piece of the plan, I should say. Alright. How does it impact current development? Right. Yeah, we are primarily looking at influencing, the future undeveloped areas. And so that's the main impact that this will have. I'm not gonna tell anyone you're not gonna buy anyone's land and tell them to tear down their house, because that's where we want the pronghorn are. So. Okay. Any other questions or discussion? We can take that now, but I do want to just let you know the next steps. So this month and next month, we'll be drafting that implementation plan, so that chapter of the Wildlife Corridor Plan. We'll be continuing to meet with the technical advisors, a number of them we mentioned to you today, to make sure everyone's on the same page. March, we'll be preparing the plan for public input, and then in April, we'll be doing community outreach, and I should add here, we'll be coming back to a joint work session, probably in April as well. And then, so we'll share with you the recommendations, how the plan's coming together, and then we'll have the community outreach, we'll have some online virtual engagement that will probably be open through, the end of April, and then we'll finalize the plan and the chapter for you in June. That's kind of our tentative plan, is to have the plan adopted by council in June.
John, anything else?
If I could just quickly thank you again. I know it's an awful lot. I mean, really, if you're feeling overwhelmed, you're not alone. It's a lot of information. It's a rigorous process, and we know this. We've been through this to some extent, some of us, these folks, many more times, but recognize that. Just to be real, it's a lot. And you look at each of these pathways, even individually, it can be overwhelming. So we understand that, and that's why we're looking at a longer, rigorous process to really end up where we're most comfortable. And that synergy between development and the conservation, the wildlife corridor that we're talking about, it's just so dynamic. And we see some of the comments, and we're in agreement. I mean, it's a lot of variables and a lot of things to consider. It can be overwhelming, but really appreciate your time. I'd also like to thank Gilbert and the management office. I mean, think about, the facilitation and why we're even to this point. Really, give thanks for that. And I know Gilbert reached out, correct me if I'm wrong, early on, to Game and Fish, to contacts he had from his past experience with the conservation plan that he mentioned, but also with the county, which was previously SIMPO, now Y Plan. Brought them in. Gilbert brought us in the room just to kick this thing off and talk about the regional aspect of this, and that continues. So we appreciate that as well. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we wouldn't be standing here today, if it wasn't for that facilitation. So thank you all. We appreciate it.
And again,
Mr. Vice Chair, I have one question.
Go for it, Sandy.
Thank you, John and team. I don't understand how we can implement and adopt and bring forward a final plan without having any dollars connected to it and know what we are going to do. How does that happen?
If I could, and you guys jump in, my simplistic understanding and approach, I mean, we're working through that. And we've agreed that this plan will have a schedule of fees in it and ranges of each of these elements, which will help us, move forward and implement. And so that is a requirement to be in this plan. Yes, yes.
Can I ask staff to definitely send Logan Simpson's information to all of us, just so if anyone has any questions or any, concerns and so forth that we can relay to Logan Simpson, I would definitely appreciate that. Definitely want to thank Logan Simpson and staff for all their hard work for up to this point. And if there's anything else from anybody, we'll stand adjourned. Thank you.